Well, it's gotten very noisy down here. You know, this is 167th day first video. And I think earlier I said I'm sorry about the barn swallows. The truth is I'm not sorry about the barn swallows. My son mentioned when he was listening to me on reviewing what I thought, he said, it sounds like you're teaching in an aviary. Good, good. At some point I probably will take the camera and show you these barn swallows. I think they're fighting right now is one of the reasons that they're so noisy. And at least the frogs aren't singing at the moment. In the evening the frogs are as loud as they are here. I know I'm going fast. I know that. Well, it's I don't have that much time left, and for those of you that don't speak English as your native language, if you're following me or you're not used to my American accent, you've had all year. So I know I'm going fast. I'm sorry. I'll try to also be loud. If I can. The barn swallows, they just left. They'll be back. I forgot the term natural selection when I was talking about Darwin. That's the other phrase that people use when they talk about Darwin. And the movie was not Day After Tomorrow. What I couldn't think of was Independence Day. That was the modern take on War of the Worlds. These are corrections. And I still haven't been able to think of the Michael, and I should, he's such a famous actor. But in The Man Who Would Be King, he plays opposite Sean Connery. And that name, at least I can give you. It's so close, but I can't think of it. All right, well, now we're turning to America. This is still the Victorian era. In the United States, it goes by other names. There's the antebellum period before the war. There's Civil War period, the Restoration period, the gay 90s, the turn of the century. But I'm lumping it all together as the Victorian period. So what was going on in America? Well, Longfellow. You know, I have to be careful because I could say too much about Longfellow. He was a poet. And I think to this day he might still be called America's favorite poet. I think. In his day, he was a favorite. When I was at college, at Harvard, 1960s, and they sort of put him down in a way. I didn't like that because I thought his poetry was good. But and he lived there in Cambridge, I believe. He taught at Harvard. Anyway, I have profound respect for him. Anymore, what kids might know is a short poem of his that starts, "Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of," and if I stop, kids can use it, say Paul Revere. That's a poem he wrote about the American Revolution. Evangeline. Now, I underlined it. I suppose I have mentioned it before. And I've even thought about a spin-off from my classes where I teach Evangeline. Evangeline, it's wonderful. It's a very long narrative poem written in hexameter. Doesn't rhyme. It was done in epic style. I studied it in 8th grade, and I don't know then if I was impressed as I should have been, but later on I became very impressed with it, to the extent that I used to think, before I realized that 7th and 8th graders could deal with Shakespeare, before I realized that, I used Evangeline as my goal. I thought if I can get my students to the point where they can appreciate the poetry in Evangeline, I'll feel like I've taken them far enough as 14-year-olds. It opens like this. This is the forest primeval, the murmuring pines and the hemlocks, bearded in moss and in garments green indistinct in the twilight, stand like druids of eld with beards that rest on their bosoms. Loud the deep-voiced neighboring ocean speaks, and in accents disconsolate answers the wail of the forest. It is just so rich. It is very, very sad. And last year, I was gratified that the teacher who actually gave me these blackboards, I have 3 of these, she was 8th grade English and history teacher, but also an English teacher. And she took it on herself to teach Evangeline. in her courts. It takes place during the French and Indian War, we call it in America. I guess the best I can do is just tell you it's there. It is very, very rich. It has the same density, well, or the same kind of density of poetic devices that is in Shakespeare. He pulls out all the stops in terms of poetic devices. I really can't praise it enough. He also wrote The Courtship of Miles Standish. When I was a little kid, I think first grade, I got to play the part of John Alden. This takes place in New England, and I remember I was kind of put out because John Alden got the girl, but who cared? Miles Standish was a little kid that got to go around with a sword. You know, at that time, I would a lot rather have a sword than a girl. But anyway, that's just a memory. All right, Longfellow. Still another thing about two things. He's the only American writer that is honored in Westminster Abbey, in the Poets' Corner. There's a monument to Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And the other thing I just recently discovered, apparently Longfellow was a great admirer of Goethe. Goethe is a German romantic poet. I didn't know that. And I want to look more into that because Longfellow must have known German, I guess. All right, and Stephen Foster. Well, he was a songwriter, an American songwriter. He lived here in Pennsylvania. He's the first famous American songwriter. And with Americans, if you go, Camptown ladies sing this song, Americans can't stop themselves. They got to go doo-dah, doo-dah. Camptown racetrack 5 mile long, oh doo-dah day. Going to run all night, going to run all day. Bet my money on the bobtail nag, somebody bet on the bay. They can't always go that far, but they can't hold back the doo-dah. Camptown, you try. Camptown ladies sing this song. I always think of in Framing Roger Rabbit when they had to find a rabbit back in there, and he goes dun 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 dun. And that Roger Rabbit had to come out with da da, and it revealed. Anyway, the other real famous one is Oh Susanna. Oh, I come from Alabama with my banjo on my knee, going to Louisiana, my true love for to see. These songs swept the world. They actually became worldwide hits. Although Stephen Foster died a poor man, and he wrote other Way Down Upon the Swanee River, or I Dream of Jeannie with the Light Brown Hair. I'm not sure the rest of the world if they relate to them like Americans do, but pre-Civil War, major songwriter. Harriet Beecher Stowe, she only wrote one book of any importance, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and some people say that book caused the American Civil War. She showed the plight of American slaves in that book. And whether or not it was realistic is hard to say, but it affected the North to the extent that they were willing to let their sons and husbands go and fight that, to stop that kind of a thing. Poor little Liza, sold down, her husband George was sold down the river, and she runs away, and Simon Legree, the evil guy with bloodhounds, goes after her. She crosses a river that's covered with ice, but then when the ice when Simon Legree goes to go across, the ice melts and they drown. That is a clear allusion to the Hebrew slaves leaving Egypt and Pharaoh's army being drowned. What I like to do with that, when I had time, was I would jump to the 20th century, to the 1940s, and the Broadway musical The King and I. In The King and I, they do Uncle Tom's Cabin as a Siamese dance. And if, as I say, when I had time, I liked to show that because I could gain so much. Show the Victorian era, show Uncle Tom's Cabin, show the work of Rodgers and Hammerstein, who wrote that. And also tip my hat to the East, because this course, I don't know if you've noticed, but this course tends to be about the Western world. A problem. All right, we get to the American Civil War. Lincoln's Gettysburg Address is the most famous speech ever made, I think, in the United States. Even ultimately more so than I Have a Dream speech, I think. 77 years ago, our forefathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And it's short. And when I start it, sometimes I'll have a student who can keep going with it, because this was widely memorized. It is still widely memorized by Americans because it's short. The American Civil War also gave us songs, like the Battle Hymn of the Republic was the Song of the North. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible quick sword. His truth is marching on. And then, glory, glory, hallelujah. I don't know if that's known outside the United States like it is here. It's spoofed. When I was a kid, I learned, glory, glory, hallelujah. Teacher hit me with a ruler. Bopped her on the bean with a rotten tangerine, and she ain't gonna teach no more. Something like that. The South had songs. Dixie. Oh, I wish I was in the land of cotton. Old folks there are not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. It's like a dance. By now, the piano had been not only invented, but was widely available. And families at home, someone could play the piano and they would sing these songs, Stephen Foster songs and these songs. And then finally, the Civil War has served as a setting for a lot of fiction. Most famously, Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind, sometimes called the American classic. Scarlett O'Hara, Rhett Butler on a southern plantation named Tara. And one of the things I like to point out to the kids is when this was made into a movie in the 1930s, it shocked the world. Because at the end, Rhett Butler says to Scarlett, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn." And he swore. He had sworn in a movie. That's the first time that had ever happened. The Red Badge of Courage is certainly not as big and probably not as famous. But used in schools, it's about a kid too young really to be fighting the war, and he wished he had a red badge of courage. That's a bandage with blood soaking out of it, because that would be like a badge that showed that he had the nerve to stay and fight. Oh, I hate to go through this stuff so fast in a way, but that's the nature of the course. I have one more video today.